he plays everything. He's one of those guys. Plays everything.
That's cool.
We got guitars, banjos, pianos, everything.
Is he didgeridoo? Is he a didgeridoo player?
No, but I had an Australian guy. I had an Australian guy teach me that one time, and I sort of had it down, but it still sounded like I was just going into a tube.
There was one year at Glastonbury Festival, and everybody came back from Glastonbury Festival, and they said, it was brilliant, Mark, when you got up on stage with the Hot House Flowers playing didgeridoo. And I was like, I don't think I was at Glastonbury, and I don't think I've ever played with the Hot House Flowers, and I don't play didgeridoo. And they go, no, it was you. It was like we all saw it. Everybody saw you on stage. One of those great mysteries where apparently I was the didgeridoo player for the Hot House Flowers at Glastonbury.
Oh, you should have eaten that up.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. I'm Scott Rouse. I'm a body language expert and analyst. I train law enforcement in the military in interrogation and body language. And I created the True Crime Workshop with Greg Hartley. Mark?
I'm Mark Bowden. I'm an expert in human behavior and body language. I help people all over the world to stand out, win trust, gain credibility every time they speak, including some of the leaders of the G7. Chase.
Thanks, Mark. I'm Chase Hughes. I'm a best-selling author in human behavior, body language, influence, and persuasion. Did 20 years in the U.S. military. Now I spend my time teaching that to intelligence agencies and the general public. Greg?
Greg Hartley. I'm a former Army interrogator, interrogation instructor, resistance to interrogation instructor. I've written 10 books on body language and behavior and put this True Crime Workshop at truecrimeworkshop.com together with Scott Rouse. And I spend most of my time on Wall Street or in corporate America.
Excellent. All right. Well, today we're going to talk about Oscar Pistorius. And he's the guy that is accused of murdering his girlfriend, whereas he says it was an accident. And Greg, you're the one that searched all this stuff up. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on this?
Yeah, so you can go and find a tremendous amount about this guy and the relationship. He had only been dating this girl for about 3 months when this actually occurred. And the whole story is that you can watch the whole thing. There are interviews out there where he tells this story about her coming over and spending Valentine's Day with him at his house in the middle of the night. I won't say he wakes up. You can hear his story and see what he says. But in the middle of the night, he wakes up. He thinks there's an intruder. He ends up shooting into the bathroom. And you have to go look at the layout. It's really awkward that she would get past him into the bathroom. And that he ends up killing her and only later discovering it. Interestingly, neighbors heard a woman screaming, a man screaming. So like there was a fight. And then when you get him to court, his story apparently changes under cross a couple of times, from it being an accidental discharge to him actually shooting, thinking it was someone else. So we're not going to go into any of those details. We're just going to let him speak for himself with body language and behavior in this thing. Fair?
Yeah, good.
All right. Anybody got anything else?
If we step back, one last thing. This is, if you don't know the case, this is a very famous Olympian. This is a guy they call the Blade Runner, who had the prosthetic legs. And actually there were rules made in the Olympics because he was faster than people on their real legs. So he's very famous, very well known. And it's just been a few years since this has happened. And you have to go look at the court cases because he's in or out of jail. I'm not sure exactly at this point.
Cool. Okay. All right. Well, let's take a look at the first video.
The echo in the bathroom was so loud, I couldn't hear anything. So I was shouting at Reva, phone the police, phone the police. And I was still screaming, get out of the house, get out of the house. And I couldn't hear anything. It was just this ringing. And I'm terrified. And at a point I realized, Reva, I can't hear if Reva's replying or not. I make the decision to walk backwards the whole way. I don't really know what's going on. And I get to the bed, and then as I reach back and I can't feel Reva's leg, I get this chill over me. I look back and I see Reva isn't in the bed. And I start hitting on the duvet cover, and I'm like, Reva. And I thought, okay, no, a sense of calm then came over me, because I was like, she's listened to me. She got down on the floor. And I get down to the floor and I can't feel her. So I start pulling everything apart, and I start saying, I'm like, Reva. And I'm like pulling my hand, and I'm on my stumps now still. As I'm pulling my hand across the curtain, thinking like, Lord, please just tell me she's hiding behind the curtains. And I get to the end of the curtains and my heart just sinks.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so first of all, let's look at where this comes from. It's from a piece of entertainment for ITV, the independent television in the UK. so he's recounting this story in the present tense. And so if you look through the whole interview, he changes tense throughout this. I think this is possibly more about the interviewer and the producers trying to get him into the present tense, because it's more interesting dramatically. It's more of a reconstruction, and he stands the chance of hitting more emotions. If he's describing it in the present tense, he's more likely to relive it and have more vivid emotions. You'll also hear this music behind it as well. Again, that's going to provoke a certain emotion from you as the viewer. So one of the best things you can do during this is turn the sound off so that you're not influenced by the emotion and just try and see what you see. So here's what I see. There is a peaking of emotion there, and we do actually see blood rushing to the nose and the cheeks and the lips. That's hard to do on purpose. You'll notice in Japanese animations, when they want to show somebody who's at a heightened emotion, they'll make the nose go all red and the cheeks go red, and they'll heighten the lips. The Japanese seem quite interested in showing us emotions via blood flow. Europeans, not so much. So what do I get from all of this? I think there is a heightened emotion here. There is some true emotion going on here, but that doesn't tell us anything about why the emotion is there. But I'd say there's some true emotion going on here and some quite heightened emotion. That's what I got for you. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a different approach. While you're talking about him changing tense, this is a very interesting story to pay attention to. I looked at his baseline when he talks about his past, when he talks about her showing up. He says she came in, she did this. He uses past tense always. Pay attention throughout this entire interview. The only time he goes into present tense is when he's telling the story. And I don't mean the entire story, because when he gets into a place where she's dead, he changes tenses. I really think that the prepared part of his statement, the things he's been ready for, are all tied to present tense. And I think that's how he works himself into this emotional thing. Not saying he doesn't feel emotion because he killed this woman or because he ruined his life. Certainly, I think he feels something there. But I think that when he's telling the story he's prepared, if you'll notice, he's doing that right in this angle. I can't tell whether he's right or left because it could be reversed, but he's doing right, auditory cue kind of thinking. And it's rote. It's stuff he's remembered and stuff he's prepared to pitch. There's also the thing. There are really three kinds of memory we talk about. We talk about short-term memory, long-term memory, and sensory memory. Sensory memory, quite simply, if you stare at a ceiling fan for 30 seconds and close your eyes, you'll see that. Your brain holds onto that. He goes out of his way to deny sensory memory. My ears are ringing. I couldn't hear. I couldn't see because I was walking backwards. He stutters as he says, I chose to walk backwards. And he says, I have no idea what that meant. There's not grief muscle, this grief muscle, Duchenne's grief muscle, at all when he's recounting. Now he's talking about he's just shot through the door 4 times. Now we missed the lead up and why he shot through the door, but he's talking about it as shot through the door and I walk backwards. You're starting now to see this. The other one that you're going to see a pattern throughout here is every time he talks about his stumps, as he refers to them, he makes direct eye contact with the guy. And that's what I've got. Scott, what do you got?
All right. Well, this is odd behavior for someone who's supposed to be in a panic mode or is describing what happened in such a horrible scene. We're seeing his illustrators are minimal here. We don't see much at all. I know there's stuff going on we can't say because we're only seeing from like the shoulders up, but there's nothing coming to the head, nothing coming to the face, nothing that denotes someone is almost not paying attention to their illustrators. Everything seems really controlled. And he seems almost expressionless. And some people say, oh, it's because of Botox. But in a few minutes, you're going to see there's no Botox because of what we see in the grief muscle, which is an incredible view. And if you want to study the grief muscle, this is a place to start. The upper part, anyway. We'll get to the lower parts of the grief. Other grief, the grief expression has several things going on, but there's one that's missing that's really important. There are a couple of missing, really important. But we'll see that his grief muscle goes through almost pops out of the top of his head. It's so big. As he's talking about this and he starts speeding up, there are breaks in these descriptive sentences, like they've been rehearsed. He'll go, there's a break, but he talks for a long time, but there'll be a break. As he tries to remember what he said as he set this up, he's rehearsed this, but he's rehearsed it out loud. And it may be from telling the story so often that he's got that, but he's got this thing down. And I think what we're seeing here is his buildup, which we'll see in what I'll call the crescendo of his act. We're seeing him build up to that. Especially when he says, I made the decision to walk backwards. He's talking about decisions he made during all this. Those are details you don't have. Greg calls it going into you turn to the cat brain. That thing turns on. You're just a scared cat. And you're just reacting. When something like that happens, you're reacting at that point, and you're protecting yourself. He's putting himself, and you'll protect your loved ones as well. But he's putting himself, as we go along, we'll hear how he put himself between whoever might be in the bathroom and her, and these things where he did to help her. So he seems like a hero. And he's making the things that he's talking about. Once you hear the full story and you realize what he calls the whole story, and you hear what the people outside of this story, the people who are listening, what they recount as hearing, you're hearing the same things he's saying. Like he's saying, I was yelling, you'll hear him say, I was yelling, get out of the house, get out of my house, get out of my house. And I think he was yelling at her as he was, and is saying he was yelling at the person, whoever it was in the bathroom, because he's letting everyone know, yeah, I did see those things. They did hear that because I was yelling at the person in the bathroom. This is a contrived setup, and he's approaching that crescendo here in just a few minutes. I'll stop there. Chase, what do you got?
One of the oldest lie detectors in the world was a handful of rice. And the Chinese did this, the Egyptians did this. They would put rice into a person's mouth and interview them and ask them lots of questions. And a few minutes later, if the rice came out dry and they could spit it out, they're guilty. There was some truth to that, even though this was a technique that was popular around the time that smart people still believed in handwriting analysis and lumps on your head mean something. This salivation actually does decrease during times of intense emotional stress. And what we're seeing here, we're seeing a lot of saliva, but what you're actually seeing here is a buildup of mucus. I called a friend of mine who referred me to an article today from, I kid you not, the Journal of Behavioral Dentistry that actually exists. And so the saliva becomes thicker the less moisture is available. So it turns into a mucus. And that's what we're seeing here. And all of the statements, whether they be present tense or past tense, were removed. I made the decision to walk backwards, or instead of I decided to. As I reach back and I can't feel her leg, like instead of I reached back and there was nothing there. I reached back and couldn't feel her leg. I get this chill over me instead of a chill came over me, or I felt a chill. A sense of calm came over me. Tons more like this. And just in this one clip, my heart just sinks. So in storytelling, this is called showing and telling, and he's doing more telling than showing. People who are telling stories or recalling events that are truthful are more likely to show you what happened, to help you to understand the story. And one thing I will say about the audio accessing cues and the eye movements here, about 85 to 90% of the times he was using audio accessing, he was talking about an audio memory of the ringing in the room or him screaming. So I would say it's just a good data point. Doesn't disagree or discount you guys, but just a good data point to make note of. That's all.
Yeah, you'll see him use it for everything. Is the piece. Yeah, if he deviated, you would think, okay, yeah, that was his ears ringing. But yeah, no, it's everything.
And we'll see that. We'll see that coming up.
For sure. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
The echo in the bathroom was so loud, I couldn't hear anything. So I was shouting at Reva, phone the police, and I was still screaming, get out of the house, get out of the house. And I couldn't hear anything. It was just this ringing, and I'm terrified. And at a point I realized, Reva, I can't hear if Reva's replying or not. I make the decision to walk backwards the whole way. I don't really know what's going on. And I get to the bed, and as I reach back and I can't feel Reva's leg, I get this chill over me. I look back and I see Reva isn't in the bed. And I start hitting on the duvet cover, and I'm like, Reva, Reva, Reva. And I thought, okay, no, a sense of calm then came over me, because I was like, she's listened to me. She got down on the floor. And I get down to the floor, and I can't feel her. So I start pulling everything apart, and I start saying, I'm like, Reva, Reva, Reva. And I'm like pulling my hand, and I'm on my stumps now still. As I'm pulling my hand across the curtain, thinking like, Lord, please just tell me she's hiding behind the curtains. And I get to the end of the curtains, and my heart just sinks.
All right, we good? Let's move along.
In the house, but I'm not, mixed with another fear. So I rush on my stumps back as quick as I can to the bathroom, and I've still got the firearm pointed at the door. It's locked, and I realize there is somebody inside here, and they're not answering me. And what if it's Reva? And I start shouting, and I'm trying to rip the door open. I don't have any balance on my stumps. So I run back to my room. I've still got the firearm in my hands, and I'm trying to put on my legs as quick as possible. I ran back to the bathroom, and I start kicking the door. I don't know if I kicked it once or twice, and I just kick. I try to charge the door with my shoulder, and the door wouldn't open. And I'm screaming now for Reva, and I just start screaming, Jesus, please, God, please, 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 just don't let this be what I think it is. I need to get in this toilet to see if it's Reva. And if she's not answering, why isn't she answering me? Is she scared? Is she okay? So I run back to the room, back down the passage, and I get the cricket bat. And I start smashing down this door. I reach into the door to open the lock from the inside, and I realize the key isn't there. And I punch one, I take one of the planks that's now, this is loose, and I rip it out. And there I can see Reva's on the floor.
Okay, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so this one's more of the same. Every time he says stumps, eye contact, request for approval. When he says cricket bat, there's some asymmetry, and there's a belief that he was trying to beat the door down with the cricket bat, couldn't, and then shot. There's all kinds of stuff that comes up here. He starts to talk about, I realize that someone's in the bathroom and is not answering me. Well, hell, you just put 4 bullets in the door of a 8-foot wide room. What do you think is going to happen? And then maybe it's Reva. And then he runs back, and then he, as fast as he can on his stumps, he makes eye contact again. He started what I call starting into the well. You can see he has words that are drawing him down into that emotional state, and he's starting to do that. He talks about kicking the door. I kicked it once or twice. I kicked it over and repeatedly. I won't steal everything here because there's so much. But he finally, when he gets into the point where he's talking about the realization that she's in the bathroom and he's shot. Also, does anybody wonder why the bathroom is locked from inside with a key and the key is not in the bathroom door? Anybody else think that's a little odd? Then he goes in that whole plaintive wail kind of, and he's starting to change his tone and pitch. This is a little kid in trouble. My mom and dad are on me, and I start the kind of sad wailing thing to get out of it. And then he starts to jumble his cadence. There are a couple of others in here I won't mess with, but there's just not effective communication. Again, Scott, you're right, dead on. No illustrators. His body language is not saying what his mouth is saying. He later says, I made a mistake when he's in court. And that's what I think this is about. The grief is about, I made a mistake. Not so much about, I'm sure he feels grief for killing this woman at some point, but that's not what this is about. Finally, when he starts to eye access downright and he realizes he's done something wrong, it's about his life and what's going on. That's my opinion. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. So okay. So let's work out what's going for him in terms of if this is, the truth going on here. Well, there is quite a heightened emotion there. And I think anybody watching it would instantly go, okay, really strong emotions here, really strong emotions of grief. So let's believe this. But here's what I see in it. You get this heightened emotion, and he says, please, 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 5 times. If we go back to Joe Navarro's idea that any repetition is self-soothing, let's see if that is correct for words. And I think it may well be, because you get this strong repetition. I think that isn't about him calling out, please, 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 may she be alive. It's him self-soothing himself in this situation. I think, then we hear the pleas to God. I think he says Jesus, he says God. To Greg's point there, that usually under fear, people will start calling out for a higher power or a parent. They'll call for dad, they'll call for mum, they'll call for God, they'll call for Jesus, something to help them, something to save them, often in cases not of remorse, but fear. So I think what we're seeing here is self-soothing around his fear of this situation. And it's quite heightened fear. Now, is that because he's innocent or guilty or, I don't know. It's strong emotions, but the emotions seem to be his own self-soothing, not concern for the event that's happening right now as he, in the present tense, tells us about this event that's going on. There's my take on it.
Mark, the whole point, present tense. Every statement he makes in this part is in present tense. Again, no past tense yet.
Yeah. Scott, tell us what you got.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Here again, he's describing everything in reverse because he says he shot through the door, then he tried to knock the door in with his cricket bat. Now, he tried to get the door in with get the door open with his cricket bat and tried to kick it open and all that before he shot through the door, because I'm sure whatever he's mad about that he's so mad at her about, he's beating on the door with a cricket bat. You come out of there, whatever. How many times have you heard that story? I've never heard it in reverse like that. And been able to go, really? He's telling this in reverse because the big crescendo of this part is when he shoots through the door because nothing else is because he can't get in, or after he can't get in, after shooting through the door, he tries to beat and get in. Nah, he tried to beat the door in because he was mad at her. I think that's and I bet you $1 million any woman watching this sees exactly what he's doing because their brain is set up differently than ours, and they collect more information in a different way than we do as guys. And they're all going, not buying. They're not buying it at all. And when he says his detail, when he said, I need to get into this toilet, you don't think those ways. Again, like Greg says, you're in cat brain mode at that point. And you're just going, oh no, I got to do so-and-so. Then he's saying, please, please, please. He's not gonna, that's not about, oh, please God. You'd be saying, no, 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 no. No, don't let this be happening. Not please, don't let it have happened. It'd be like, no, 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 don't let this happen. Don't let this, it'd be no, it wouldn't be please at this point. So I agree with Mark on that about being a self-soothing thing. At the same time, Greg and I do a whole module in the True Crime Workshop about trance behavior. And so this is getting close. It's not quite. We see a little bit of that in a few minutes, but he gets that. He's going, please, 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 please. He's saying that almost in this trance thing just to try to work himself up. And I believe at the same time, Mark, he's using that as a pacifier because he's trying to think. He needs some time to think. He never calls the police. He never tries to call the cops. He never does anything like that. He supposes that she's done that. And another thing, we don't see his expressions. Man, he's still, with all this supposedly going on, still almost expressionless with this. We don't see the knitting of the brow like you'd see. You don't see that any of this in there, all the almost confusion about what's going on. When he's talking about confusion, we don't see anything. We don't see the eyes lifting up for approval, like Greg always talks about, because he doesn't need it at that point. When he needs is when you see it when he looks at him and talks about his stumps, and he looks up as in, do you feel sorry for me yet? Like you were saying earlier, Greg. So that's where we're seeing that. Other than that, we're not seeing much at all. And then there's one point where on the right side of his face, you're going to see his lip go up and his eye kind of squint. And a lot of people are going to think that's a micro expression of contempt or disdain. I'm going to say, or I would vote, that that's more of a wince than anything else. It's not an expression of disdain or contempt. It looks a lot like one. It's very quick, and you really have to pay attention to it. But what we're seeing there is a wince at what happened, because he's going through and looking at what he did to her, but in the overall picture, what he's done to himself. He sent himself to prison forever, how long they sent you to prison for over there, which I think is 15 years or something, which doesn't seem like a lot of time to me. But that's what I think we're seeing when we start seeing the grief muscle engage, those things. It's all about him at that point. I'm not saying he's a narcissist or a psychopath. I don't think he's a psychopath at all. But we're seeing things that concern him. The expressions we're seeing are expressions about what he's feeling about himself. Chase, what do you got?
I think you're where you saw that face is when he said his cricket bat.
Oh, okay. All right. Chase?
You got to keep in mind, this is South Africa. Tigers are always involved with everybody. So just put that out there. All the grief that's present, we can see a lot of this grief right here in this little, I can't do it, Greg can do it. There it is, perfect. That's hard to fake. But all the grief that we see here is for himself. We don't see it in parts where he's genuinely concerned or pretending to be concerned for Riva. And there is several confirmation glances that he makes with the interviewer. So every time, and you can go back and look at this, when he looks back at the interviewer and makes good eye contact, which I call a confirmation glance, which is a small, fleeting glance during a conversation, is at key times when evidence supporting his story is mentioned. I grabbed this. I was very worried. I was begging God. All of these things that are key parts of the story for his defense is exactly when he makes these confirmation glances. Very deceptive, in my opinion. We see here again, I realize the key isn't there. I can see Riva's on the floor. I realize there's someone inside. So these are all telling instead of showing. I realized that happened instead of just this happened. We don't say, let's say we got in a car accident today. Say, well, I was driving down and I realized the guy in front of me slammed on his brakes. We don't say that. We say the guy in front of me slammed on his brakes. Not that you realized it. We understand that you realized it when you tell us that something happened. So that's why it's not a natural part of our language when we speak in truth. And pay attention to how many times he's saying, I started to X. I started to do this, because this is the beginning of an action. So I'm going to tell you that it started to. This is, again, writing advice from a coach to a bad author. Would say you need to completely cut out any instance of saying the word starting. You should never have ing verbs in a book. That's one of the rules of thumb. Ing verbs need to go. That's all I got.
In the house, but I'm not mixed with another fear. So I rush on my son's back as quick as I can to the bathroom, and I've still got the firearm pointed at the door. It's locked, and I realize there is somebody inside here, and they're not answering me. And what if it's Riva? And I start shouting, and I'm trying to rip the door open. I don't have any balance on my stumps. So I run back to my room. I've still got the firearm in my hands, and I'm trying to put on my legs as quick as possible. I ran back to the bathroom, and I start kicking the door. I don't know if I kicked it once or twice, and I just kick. I try to charge the door with my shoulder, and the door wouldn't open. And I'm screaming now for Riva, and I just start screaming, Jesus, please, God, please, 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 just don't let this be what I think it is. I need to get in this toilet to see if it's Riva. And if she's not answering, why isn't she answering me? Is she scared? Is she okay? So I run back to the room, back down the passage, and I get the cricket bat. And I start smashing down this door. I reach into the door to open the lock from the inside, and I realize the key isn't there. And I punch one, I take one of the planks that's now, this is loose, and I rip it out. And there I can see Riva's on the floor.
All right, let's move on.
I'm just praying for the Lord. I'm like, oh God, please, 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 please. And I opened the toilet door, and immediately when I saw Riva, she was over the toilet. She'd slumped over the toilet, and I thought at that point I knew that I'd killed her. I knew that she was dead, and I went down on my knees and pulled her onto me.
All right, Chase, what do you got?
We see him rushing forward in this clip, almost pushing forward, and there's not much eye contact or movement. So if I had you memorize a string of 14 numbers and you've got them all cranked out, and I say you need to hold them in your brain for 60 seconds. And if you memorize it for a minute, I'm going to give you 10 grand. So what's going to happen? The moment you have to recite everything all at once in an accurate series, you're going to be very still. You'll probably look away, and you'll be looking at a certain point, rattling off the numbers as fast as you can, because it's a rehearsed thing. If you're telling a story that's emotional, we'll have more pauses, more time for breaths between. And people who speed up typically either do it A, because they have a fear of being interrupted or questioned, or B, to minimize the amount of time that they're experiencing the stress of telling a lie. And there's a sudden shift to past tense after this first line of, I'm just praying to the Lord. Then he shifts back to past tense again. And we're going to see this soon in a way that is unprecedented. I have hit the 30,000 hour mark probably a long time ago, and I've never seen anything like this in the coming videos. But there was a moment of grief, genuine grief muscle, when he's talking about seeing her slumped over the toilet. And I think that's genuine grief. And it doesn't make him not a murderer by any measure. But when he said, so we see genuine grief, we know that he's capable of the expression. And then when he said, I realized that I had killed her, nothing on the forehead. Not even a contraction of any muscle on the forehead. There's a lot left here. I'll pass it to you, Greg. What do you got?
Yeah, so we're on the same page. The grief muscle, I think there's genuine and active grief, whether it's because of her or because he's ruined his life or because of something else. There's genuine and active grief. That little U at the top, you can't miss. Looks different in every person's body, but it's where those muscles arch, right in the top. That's Duchenne's grief muscle. Chase, you talk a lot about chin boss and those are important parts as well. But this one is easy to read on someone's forehead. Immediately when I saw her, then he says, she was over the toilet. She had slumped. He does an emotional access for the first real time in this. His eyes are down and to his right as he's accessing that. But he uses words like she had slumped. Those are traditional murder distancing words. When you're trying to distance from what's actually happened, and then he actually says, I had killed her. He's in past tense for this entire thing, which is really interesting.
It's perfect past.
It is.
Instead of she was, she had been.
Yeah, and then she was dead, though, he says. She does past perfect for part of it, but everything here goes to it. Then he does this thing that I find interesting. There's a tentative touch to see if there's still, in my opinion, to see if there's still tears there. Yeah, he had tears first, and now he touches his face like, are they still there? You can see how tentative he is. And then I went down on one knee and pulled. And then the most telling thing in the entire thing for me, and he says, and now. That is where the grief is coming from to me, more than about her. Yeah, I think any human who kills another human, regardless of how you do it or when or why, there's grief, unless you're just a monster and that kind of thing. I would imagine it was a hot-tempered something and not a, hey, I'm going to kill this girl that I've been dating. I don't think it's that kind of a thing. But you can see the grief is associated with that. He's in past tense. And in this case, I believe the reason he's in past tense and the reason he's rushing so much, Chase, is he wants through it. I think this is probably horrible. This is probably horrible to admit I killed this girl at the end of a fight or at the end of whatever, and he wants to get through it. And he is in past tense. He's not thinking about telling his story in present tense. That's what I got. Scott, what do you got?
All right. We do finally see some true grief here in that grief muscle. But again, we see nothing in the chin. And when someone is grieving, before they start crying, you're going to see these sides of the mouth go down. You'll see it because you start that thing up and you get the chin. Yeah, the chin boss starts going in like that as well. We don't see that. I don't think we see that ever in this. I looked for it, never saw it, not once. So that again shows us that this is, he's not worried about. It's not true grief for her. The thing he's worried about is him. There is grief there. We don't see it all, but we see some part of it. For some reason, we're not seeing the lower part of the expression. There's a thing called the oropharynx, and that's the part of the throat at the back of the mouth where the throat sort of ends. That's where your larynx is, and those types of things. When you're really getting ready to cry, you're really upset, that thing tightens up. It tightens up, and it's hard to talk. It's hard to breathe. And there's a thing called the hypopharynx, which is down here at the bottom near the stomach. And that tightens up as well. Your stomach is tight and that thing starts pulling together. And when you're trying to talk through that, it's almost painful. As you're trying not to cry, you're trying to hold back those emotions. It actually hurts when you're trying not to do that. We're not hearing that here. His voice, his stress level this is so fake because he's just making his voice go higher, but his breath sounds normal. The breath that's coming out is normal. It's a breathy voice. Nothing's tightening up in there the way it should tighten up. And I agree. He has one tear come down, but he lets it roll down. He doesn't touch his face because he wants you to see that tear roll down his face. This is such a show. And somehow he's worked those things up because he's probably worried about going to prison, what's going to happen to him in prison. But he's still at the top of this. He's still in cat brain when he's still going, please, please, please don't, when he should be saying no, no, no at that point. There's a ton of things here, but I'll just be repeating what we've all seen. But I think we're seeing all fake here, not a whole lot at all. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so I think Chase has said this before, but confession is a social act. I mean, there are many situations where there's ritual around it. Specific confessors that you go to. Confession is a kind of normal thing that people often do. What I would be expecting to see in a true confession is he would get eye contact for a moment as he says, I did it, and then look away in grief, in remorse. In shame, but I would be expecting a moment, if just fleeting, of strong eye contact where there's that moment of release for him, that he says, it was me. I don't see that. I see his head, he eye blocks all the way through. He does manage to get a tear. It's pretty good. I mean, there's some good things going for him, but around all of this, that we see so much glances for confirmation and approval outside of this. We see a lot of potential eye blocking during all of this. At the moment of confession, we don't see him look at the confessor to get society's approval of that moment of confession. There's a lot wrong with this. Now, he does add some things in of he mentions God again. I was down on my knees. So there's God, there's supplicants. There's a lot of elements there that we would expect to hear about around confession and remorse and shame. We hear it in the images that he sets up, but we don't see it from him. We do see, as everybody said, massive grief muscle spring up almost off the top of his head. But there's a lot missing, and within context, we don't see a lot of the stuff around it, or we see, those confirmation glances which negate a lot of this moment. But he has been building up for this. It's a beautiful arc up to this moment, which he hits on cue quite nicely. There's my take on that one.
Excellent.
I'm just praying for the Lord. I'm like, oh God, please, 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 please. And I opened the toilet door, and immediately when I saw Reva, she was over the toilets. She'd slumped over the toilets, and I thought at that point I knew that I'd killed her. I knew that she was dead, and I went down on my knees and pulled her onto me. And
all right, we good?
Yeah.
Let's move along.
I try to keep a straight face in this next one.
Man.
so that I could get her out of the toilet because I couldn't pick her up in the small space. And I put her on the bathroom floor, and I pull the curtain, the towel down for her head. And I just see blood, and it's just blood everywhere. It's just blood everywhere. There's so much blood. And I don't know what to do. I'm trying to pick her up. But there's so much blood, I can't stand up. And I thought Reva had started breathing. So I had my fingers in her mouth and I was trying to give her mouth to mouth. But there was so much blood.
Ooh. Greg, you want to go first?
Sure. This one's okay. This one is back to the present, is what I call this story, because he's in the past and he says, I couldn't pick her up. I put her on the curtain. I put a towel under her head. Then he goes back into, and there's blood everywhere. His cue, his down the well, as I refer to it, his way to get himself to cry, because people have to put themselves, unless they're talented actors, Mark, people have to take themselves to a place where they feel emotion. And his thing is all this blood and helplessness and. So he says, I put her on the towel, on the curtain. I couldn't pick her up. I put a towel under her head. Then he starts talking blood. I'm trying. I can't. Then he starts down that well and starts this crying thing. Then he goes back to the past where he says, I thought Reva started breathing. I had my fingers in. He's back in the past. Those are things that really happened. Has nothing to do with his story. And it doesn't make him more guilty or less guilty if he says, hey, I found her, she's dead, and I tried to do this. He probably did try to do that. So I see that, and then I see him go into this way down the well, the blood, more blood. It makes me think of Dracula or something, one of the plays where you got all that story, and then burying his hands in his face, all the eye blocking, and the like really elaborate screaming and crying. You, when someone does this to you, what you should do is ask them a question, because what happens is the part of their brain they're using to bawl and weep and wail and do all that turns off, because they have to answer the question. They have to use their brain again. If it's true, if they're really weeping and wailing, they're going to cry much more ferociously. If they're using their brain to create this, it's going to dry up. My first lesson in psychology from a psychologist who worked at SEER with me was that lesson. You can take advantage of that. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. Okay. I think the thing that I want to hit on here, I mean, you know, it's not a bad performance. It's not bad. It's okay. It's pretty good. Here's the one thing that's telling for me. The guy interviewing him is a guy called Mark Williams Thomas. He's a former police officer who, he worked in some serious, I think, well, you know, he worked with child abuse, and so he's done some serious interviews in his time, and then has later in his career was making TV, kind of true crime TV. Just catch as the performance peaks and towards the end of it, just catch his jawline. Well, you'll see it tense up. I would suggest he's not buying it. He's not buying it. He's got something to say about this, which he decides to hold back just before the guy leaves. I think for me, that's one of the most telling things in this, is the reaction of a person who many, many times has been in front of people in emotional states. By the way, this is the guy who did quite an interesting expose of Jimmy Savile. And maybe we'll discuss Savile at some point.
Yeah.
An interesting geezer. One more thing to put in place here. That cry that you hear, I want you to go and listen to the territorial cries of apes. Very similar. I think the shout, the cry there is the shout of, I'm done, get out of my territory now. It's to clear space around him. It's an aggressive howl to say, stop this process now. I'm done. Doesn't finish. So he gets up and leaves. Territory doesn't clear for him. That's why he leaves. The interview isn't suspended at that point.
Jace, what did I tell you about that guy this morning? We were talking on the phone.
Scott and I were talking on the phone, and both of us were like, I don't know who that guy is, but he feels like he's some of our people.
Yeah, somebody we'd hang out with, go in and run into Greg, and he'd be having lunch with him. Yeah. One of those guys.
He's an old copper from Canvey Island way, so he's like.
I love that. He puts pressure. You see.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But he leans right. He's right forward on him at this point. Now, number one, he is trying to pull out some entertainment. He's an entertainer. He makes crime TV, so he does know that that's his job. He's also good at interviews, so he puts on the pressure at that point, and he doesn't release the pressure on that howl. Most other human beings would go, "Oh, I'm out of this. Like this has gone too far." They would reel back on a howl like that and try and stop and go, "Are you okay? You all right? It's all right. Calm down. It's all okay." He doesn't. Keeps on leaning forward, which is why he has to get out and leave, because the interview is not closed at this point.
It's a beautiful job interviewing. The silence and letting the guy talk, beautiful.
Yeah. Scott, what have you got?
Okay, that's one of the things that the guy who's doing the interview. We always say when we see a good interviewer, it was so good. I don't think we heard this guy say a word. And the way and that look he's got, it's like the look you want. It's perfect. It's like you need to pull a picture of that guy off and go, this is the way you want to look when you're interrogating. Look, here's what you want to do, because this guy has nothing. He's showing him nothing. And it does look like somebody, like I said before, like you come meet Greg somewhere, and that guy would have sat down and be having lunch with if you were running into him at a restaurant somewhere. It just looks like somebody we'd hang out with, or exactly like somebody we'd hang out with. There aren't enough tears in this to go with the emotion he's trying to display. And what tears he does have, he's feeling around for him to make sure some are there, but there are one or two that come down that he leaves alone for the show part of it, but there's nothing there. He's got nothing. He's trying as hard as he can, but he can't get up enough emotion to get out those tears. And again, like I was saying earlier about trance behavior, and we talk about it in the true crime workshop. Greg, why don't you explain what trance behavior is? You explain it a lot better than I do.
Yeah, so simply, without going into a lot of details, a trance is a way for me to keep you from talking to me. So, for example, you find a mother of a child who's missing, and she's so distraught, she's rocking, and she creates patterns so that you can't reach her. That's primarily what a trance is. We'll go into more detail in that, but it's a way of keeping people at distance, simply and unaware.
So we see that again. That's the second time we've seen that. And then he gives way too many details about what's going on, where he says, I picked her up. The space was small, so it was tough to pick her up. He's giving these details. I pulled the towel down off the rack and then put it under her head. You would have said I put a towel under her head, or I tried to keep her head up off the ground. How? I used a towel. It's just too detailed. He spent way too much time thinking about this and how he's going to say it. And that's why we're getting all these little details that are just way too much. And he's showing, and that's one of those things, another one of his heroic gestures where he's showing that he cares for her and I guess loves her. I don't know. Greg, you said they've been together, 3 months or something?
Yeah, 3 months. Putting the pillow under her head, a coroner told me one time, is the best indicator when you find a body that somebody who loved this person killed him, is how they're lying.
Yeah. So. I can't wait for his apology video when he says, "Okay, you busted me." And I can't wait for that, because it's got to be coming. I hope it's coming. I hope he watches this and goes, "Yeah, I got to do one of those." So that'll be hilarious. That's all I've got as far as hilarity goes. Chase, what do you got?
So at the beginning, when I said there's a miraculous clip that we're going to look at, this is it. And let's go by the numbers, play by play, in order, and I'll break this down relatively fast. The first one, I couldn't pick her up, put her on the floor, put a towel under her head, all past tense. Next, I see the blood. I don't know what to do. I'm trying to pick her up. Sudden shift back to present tense with one more added. There is so much blood. I can't stand. Not I couldn't, I can't. Present tense. Next statements. I thought Reva had started breathing. I had my fingertips in her mouth. I was trying mouth to mouth. There was so much blood. Back to the past again. Wow. I have never seen an interview like that, and I've analyzed at least 3 in my life. That was a joke. But during this crying thing, not much breathing trouble. People who are crying have breathing trouble. Like Scott was talking about, eloquently talked about the A and P side of that, the physiology side. Absence of sniffing is when you cry. There's some stuff down here in your eye called a lacrimal duct. It runs down into your nose. That's what makes us sniff, because it's not snot. It's tears that are going down into your nose. And there's a sudden stop of crying. A sudden stop of crying. True emotions fade. They don't stop. Because the chemicals that create the emotions, like cortisol or serotonin or dopamine, have a chemical half-life in the body. Like when you take a medicine, it doesn't, like I've taken Advil for a headache or a paracetamol for you, Mark. It doesn't say, okay, I'm at the 6-hour point, bam, and it disappears. Chemicals in our body, like emotional chemicals, have a half-life. They taper off.
Or Chase, having both been military guys, hangovers, good example.
Yeah, same deal.
I don't know what you're talking. Hangover, never had one.
Finally, my last note here, my second to last note, so much crying, so little chin boss movement. Everybody knows I'm obsessed with that muscle. Type in a video of someone actually crying. Look it up on YouTube. You'll see this muscle moving right here, the chin boss. And if you talk to someone who knows about acting or who teaches actors, they might tell you, I think we've got some, we have a special guest on here tonight who knows a lot about this. When someone's trying to cry and it's not working, they tend to reach up, and I will let Mark talk about that. I have your name circled here with a question mark.
Yeah. So when it's not going well for actors, they'll hide because they don't want you to see how bad the performance is, because there's shame in how bad they're doing. When the performer's doing really well or it's real, the emotion just overwhelms them and they'll just sit there with the feeling. And as Chase was saying, it builds and it moves away. It has a certain rhythm to it. It doesn't just stop. And then often, in this case, this emotion converts, for my money, into him trying to see people out of the territory. Completely shifts for me. Hope that was the answer you were looking for there, Chase.
I was just looking for the truth, Mark.
Anybody else notice one thing missing? We talked about a confession. We all know what confessions look like. Chin covers the throat in shame, body blossoms open. Anybody see any of that?
There was some head downcast in the beginning of this, but I think that was more of an eye contact avoidance there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just missing to me. Scott, did we get you? I think you covered it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that for me was a big miss. I kept waiting. Okay, if the guy feels any remorse, you're going to see all the markers. None of that.
All right. So, Scott, what's your one sentence wrap up with the percentage?
Let's see. Man, I'm going to say I don't believe any of it. I don't think anybody I don't believe anybody's going to believe any of that. I hope he goes to prison forever. Greg, what do you got?
Okay, I'm going to be Chase. I'll give him 16.24%. The part where he's talking about sitting in her blood and looking at her body and realizing what he's done, I think he's telling the truth. It's all in past tense. It's all permanent. It's all indelibly marked in his brain. The rest of it, don't believe any of it.
Mark?
Yeah, I think there's some true feelings there. I think there is some real fear. I think there are some elements of upset and grief, but not for the victim. I think for him as the perpetrator, I don't think we see a particularly good confession. I think there's some emotions in there that actually are quite well done if it didn't have those qualifying those looks of confirmation, and he wasn't putting in so many qualifying words and statements around it. I think it would be a pretty good job. And if I didn't know what I know, I'd probably go with him and go, oh yeah, he's really upset about this. Made a terrible, terrible mistake, and there were people in the house, and I'd probably go with the idea. There's just some delicate details around there that just don't make it work for anybody who is willing to look at the delicate details in their entirety. So, you know, I'm going to say, I'll give him a 20% because there is some real concern for himself.
Chase, we're waiting.
I'm going to go with about a 18% because anytime, if you go back and listen, when he's talking in past tense, you'll hear vivid detail from actual memory. The only thing I disagree with is the fact that he tried to do CPR, but I'm not basing that on the video. It's based on the crime scene photos, and there was blood all around her mouth that was not smeared or disturbed.
So that I could get her out of the toilet because I couldn't pick her up in the small space. And I put her on the bathroom floor, and I pull the curtain, the towel down for her head. And I just see blood, and it's just blood everywhere. It's just blood everywhere. There's so much blood. And I don't know what to do. I'm trying to pick her up. I'm trying to pick her up, but there's so much blood I can't stand up. And I thought Reva had started breathing. So I had my fingers in her mouth and I was trying to give her mouth to mouth. But there was so much blood.
All right. So let's wrap this up. And if you like what we're doing, subscribe. Go ahead and hit that little thing down there, the little red thing down there by Mark. I don't know which side it's on. Your other side, Mark, right there. Yeah, it's close enough. And subscribe. That way, when something new comes out, you'll know it right away. And we usually put things out on Thursdays, but if you're a subscriber, you know it comes out on Wednesdays late. It'll be out tonight if I get this edited in time because we started late. All right. So we good?
Yeah.
Good.
All right. There's another in the can. I'll see you guys next time.
You need more than a cricket bat in.
So she's locked in the bathroom with a key, took the key out, and she has her phone. Mm-hmm. And did you guys see the gun on the floor in the crime scene photos? The hammer was still back.
It was in 1911, I think, wasn't it? Something like that.
It was like a Taurus copy of a M9.
Okay.
Ew.